everyone. I hope everyone's doing well today. Welcome to another webinar in our series. We're going to be talking about trust and trusting relationships and their relationship to grit and resilience. And so we're very happy to welcome Dr. Sarah Bren from Upshur Bren. She's a co-founder of the practice, clinical psychologist. And also with our program manager, Alyssa Capillari from New Frontiers. And then I'm Casey Schwaliker, the assistant director. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we dive right in. I'm just like I always say, we have plenty to talk about. We love doing these webinars because we're talking about things that we tend to just take as second nature and knowledge in the work we do. And we really started this whole webinar series to share that knowledge that's common knowledge to us, but maybe not to everyone else. But on the same note, we'd really prefer to be answering questions that are more pertaining to what you guys are seeing either as parents, as practitioners. We'd rather speak to what will be most meaningful to you. So there is a little questions, a box that you can use to submit questions. If you'd prefer to wait till the end and raise your hand, I can give you access to turn on your microphone. And I'll be prompting throughout tonight to get you guys to ask any questions that you may have. Case studies are okay because oftentimes what you may be experiencing, someone else here or someone else that might be watching on YouTube in the future may be able to relate to that and learn from that. So don't feel like any question might be too specific. So just before we jump in, I'd like to just launch a poll to get a little bit of an understanding of the makeup of the audience. So if you could just quickly fill that out, then we'll be able to speak a little bit more to who's here. So I always laugh about this as well because you can choose more than one option. So the percentages tend to add up to more than 100%. I swear it's not my math, it's just the way things work. So, okay, I'll close it. This is a good enough breakdown. So just to review it, we have 50% are professionals, 25% are parents of middle school students, 25% parents of high school students, and 25% of parents beyond. So some of the professionals here sounds like also have kids, which tends to happen. So just for our panelists to know kind of who we're speaking to tonight. So just to kind of quote a little bit in terms of my colleague Alyssa, she always likes to start with operational definitions, being on the kind of same page about what we're speaking about, because we might be thinking of trust as one thing, but you guys might be thinking of trust as a separate thing. So just to start off, Sarah, do you mind, like, what is trust? Like when we're talking about trust in a relationship between parents and their kids, we'll talk a little bit later about broadening this, but what is trust in trusting relations?
So I think a lot of what goes into when we're thinking about like trust and how much like how mutual trust works is has a lot to do with safety, I think. So like that's kind of a good synonym or kind of a good comparable concept is how safe do I feel in this relationship showing up as my real self? How much do I trust that you could accept me, to be curious about me, not to judge me, to you know, want to love me and be with me even in my messiest state? And that goes both ways. Like those are questions a kid is asking of their parent, and that's a question parents are asking of their kids too. It's, you know, we depending on who's asking what, you know, we can modulate that a little bit for its developmental appropriateness. But at the end of the day, like you and your child are two people who want to know that the other person loves them unconditionally, and there's trust that like I can be my messiest self with you and you're not gonna leave me.
And I love that aspect because like often we hear trust and we immediately jump to, well, lie. Like trust is you're not going to lie to me. But I think it is important about that perception piece, that trust of acceptance. And so Alyssa, just from some of what you see through coaching and stuff, how do you see some connections to the development of grit and resilience? And if you want to start with a little definition of grit and resilience and what you see, how do you see like Sarah's definition of trust playing into that?
So, all right, so like let's look at grit and resilience. So if we're gonna kind of look at grit with respect to kind of like that intersection between like consistency of effort and interest, right, and consistency of effort, even when things are difficult, even when the circumstances are less than ideal, and that resiliency is kind of the commitment and the kind of like, well, let's give it a go kind of mentality to pick at it, even when it would be very, very much more, you know, guess like okay and better feeling to just kind of pick up your ball and go home. You know, that openness to make the mistake, right? The openness to try regardless of whatever the results is going to be, good, bad, you know, win, lose, draw, whatever. And so with respect to like how trust comes into play, I think really looking at the two kind of constructions of like identity within like what someone's explicit identity and implicit identity, right? Like the way that you view yourself and the way that you make sense of the world around you versus the explicit identity in terms of how other people view you, right? And in a situation where there's a high level of trust, you put forth the image, the whatever persona that is very close to the implicit identity, right? It's almost like one in the same. You don't need to do so much in terms of the bending of the perception, right? You don't need the funhouse mirror. It's just like, here's me as I am. I'm gonna go try the thing. We'll see how it goes. And, you know, in those trusting relationships, you're able to do so without necessarily like that fear of negative consequence or that fear of criticism or failure, or you know, just any type of judgment associated with that. But when we do have situations that we see, especially early on in terms of coaching relationships, when we haven't gotten there yet, right? That's the smoke and mirrors and like that. Well, no, like it's not that deep of a hole. Don't worry, I got it covered. And so I guess that's where we're going today in terms of how do we identify, how do we build that relationship, how do we maintain it, and when the thing does not necessarily go well, because sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we muck it up, it happens. How do we respond to that?
And so Sarah, just like I kept hearing double whammy in my head of like something doesn't go well. It's a crappy outcome. And then to loop back to kind of your view of trust of now there's also judgment coming in. Like what does that do to dynamics between parents and their kids, and then just also kids in the world? Like how does that kind of create like set the stage for a different type of mindset? Like what does that lead to?
Yeah. Well, first I almost feel like you have to back up. You have to zoom out, because every parent who's sitting there judging their kid for messing up is doing it because that's what they've been taught to do, because that's probably how they were related to when they were a kid. Like, I don't think any parent, especially not if you're here on a webinar about building trust in a relationship, it wants to judge their kid, right? They're not doing this because, you know, you're really hard on your kid and most people, when our kids are struggling with something and we're getting frustrated that it's not working and want to push them to do it better, because we know they can, right? We really believe that they can, you know, achieve more or push past something that's challenging. And we may inadvertently be communicating to our child something that they're reading as judgment when we're really trying to support our kids. So like, I just want to like level set and say like, I mean, I'm a parent, like we judge our kids, and that's not bad parenting and doesn't make us bad parents. It doesn't mean we don't love our kids and doesn't mean we don't have a trusting relationship with our kids. But I think if you really start thinking about trust as safety building, and also kind of like what Alyssa was talking about, like if you want your kid to be able to come to you as their authentic true self, the kid that said, oh, I really messed up on something and I want you to help me with this, instead of the kid that shows up as like the hidden self, the false self that's like, I got this, everything's fine, I don't have any problems, and I'm definitely not telling you about them. Like, we all want our kids to come to us when they're hurting and when they're scared and when they've got their tail between their legs, or, you know, and so if we want them to do that, we have to start laying this groundwork of trust from basically the beginning. And if you haven't yet, no worries, start now. Like, you can undo stuff if you haven't known about this beforehand. But I think, so Casey, to answer your question of like, what do we do when things don't go well? And we have this kind of gut judgment on her and like, well, I told you to study and you didn't study. So these are the consequences. And like, yeah, that's true. Those are the consequences. But our kids probably are feeling those consequences without us holding them up for them. And I think a lot of trust is that I can fail and you are gonna not say, I told you so. You're gonna say, it's really hard when things don't work out, and name that pain, name that feeling, see the thing that's happening, see underneath whatever happened, the experience, and name it and validate it and empathize with it. And kind of just, that's it. Like, we don't need to solve the problem. We don't need to berate them for not having solved the problem. We just kind of need to say, this is hard when things don't work out. I'm here.
And I think that's like, so just a little, like push a little bit more, Sarah. Stopping there is so hard because there's this weird transition, and it's different for everyone. You go from feeding your baby because they can't hold their own bottle to when does that line shift that they're no longer so dependent on you, that to let them go explore on their own. So again, like, I love how you like helping really with saving face. It's not that parents are doing this from a bad place. It's instinct, it's biological. But continuing that, how does that stopping there and not problem solving, but that empathy, if I see that sucks, what role is that with grit? Because I think that's such a key moment of how that sets the table for the development of grit and resilience.
Yes, it does, because it's basically saying, I see you, your struggle is real, and I get it. And I'm really confident that you can figure this out. And I'm here with you the whole way, right? I'm gonna sit right next to you in your pain, in your struggle, in your wins and your losses. But I'm not gonna cross that finish line for you. And I'm certainly not gonna shove you across that finish line. Like, you've got to get there on your own, and I know that you can do it. That's a huge passing of a baton to a child. And obviously we're always in the back of our mind managing how appropriate developmentally are our expectations of how much our kid can do on their own. Like, you're not going to say the same level of, you're not going to kind of pass as big a baton to a 6-year-old as you are to a 16-year-old. So you kind of, as a parent, have to understand a little bit about child development, and, you know, to be able to know how much can I reasonably expect them to try to do on their own. But it's the sitting with, you do that from the beginning. You sit with our kids. Like, I work with parents of very little babies. A lot of times I work with postpartum parents who are, you know, struggling with bonding with their kid when they've just been born, and we do like parent-infant dyadic work, and a lot of that is helping a parent just sit with their child as they play on the floor and as they reach for that ball and they're struggling to get that ball, to just sort of get down next to them and say, oh, you really want that ball. I know it's so hard, you can't reach it, I'm here. And not go and grab them the ball, right? To be able to just be with your kid in the moment and reflect back to them that distress is safe, it's fine, it's comfortable for me, not comfortable, but it's tolerable for me. It doesn't freak me out. I don't have to quick run in and fix it. And that's like this is the building blocks, the very beginnings of that trust that you can have your feelings and they won't kill me. You know, I'm not going to be destroyed by your feelings. They're not that powerful or destructive or dangerous. That's like hugely powerful to give that communication to our kids and help them to learn to tolerate distress.
And through so much that I've talked with you, like just what I keep hearing in this is like in certain areas, just trusting that things are going to be okay. Like, so like you just talking about the young kids, I'm a recent uncle, and new parents, first time parents, my brother and my sister-in-law, and whenever someone else holds the baby, they get nervous. Oh my God, what if she's not smiling? All of this stuff. So they go and they stand behind whoever's holding them to make her smile. Things like that. It's like, just trust, she'll be okay. She'll get through this. Like, yes, it's new people, but that's like, it's rudimentary for building up that result. Like, I love that example with reaching for the ball. So what happens if the baby doesn't get the ball? Is the sky gonna fall? And it'll be trust through the process that it'll be okay, and build up those skills. And so, Alyssa, just to come at it from really like this behavioral and strategy development side, that holding back and sitting in the emotions that Sarah was talking about, being there together. Just to continue with this resilience and grit piece, how does this also play into problem solving and strategy development? So, and then Sarah, I'm going to tap you in about coping mechanisms and the concept of a security blanket. But like, Alyssa, what is this really through like this executive function and problem solving lens of, well, things aren't okay. Like we get to this point, like, what are these learned behaviors that can be developed?
Well, I think that really sums up exactly kind of what we talk about all the time of just what is productive struggle, right? And, where is the learning opportunity within that? And, when you have the situation that's not okay, we never actually we don't plan for it not to go well. We're not, we have a really grounded ideal, but we always set that stage first, right? In terms of how is this issue manifesting in itself? How are you experiencing it? And what are the potential, options for intervention? And then how do you go through and assess, okay, which ones are you going to choose and and then, you make your choice, right? You commit to your activity, whatever that thing is. And then, you as the person who's there, right, to help evaluate the effectiveness. Yes, they can go do their thing, but what needs to happen before all of that is just that coming to the table moment of, who's holding which keys, and that for whatever it is that needs to be done, and then just also establishing what role everyone is going to play. It is really important, and kind of like, what do you want everyone's participation to look like? What reactions can you expect from me? I think there's a good number of students right now that are going to take finals and doing final projects that have been recently told that unless they're, skinning puppies Cruella de Vil style or burning down Madison Square Garden, I'm not going to be disappointed with how it ends up, as long as we know, what's actually going on, right? And kind of like the value in transparency and communication. So as long as we've identified what the options are, as long as we've clearly displayed what the process is going to be, and, come back to the table to evaluate, whether or not, our participation moved us closer to a goalpost or not. That I think is really like the crux of the independent problem solving piece, right? It's like, can you kind of like rise to that occasion? That each component requires a high level of metacognition, a lot of flexibility and adaptability that has never been more important, and just showcases that we trust them to put all of that together and communicate it in a way that is, whether or not the outcome is what we were hoping for or looking for. It's just that you did it. Now let's see what happened. I'm not kidding.
I always say to parents all the time, I'm like, I'd rather they did it fully independently and they get a 70 and they can be proud that it was on their own than feel that they needed someone else to get that 90. Because that's that confidence piece. And we'll get to a little bit about perception of need and perception of support and how a lack of trust can appear that way. But Sarah, just to continue on with that kind of security blanket aspect, like there's a difference between sitting in pain together, acknowledging, seeing, and trusting that they'll be able to get through things versus being a coping mechanism. And so I think this is one of those, it's not black and white. It's hard to define the gray, but if you could talk a little bit about what is being there in a trusting, loving, supportive relationship as opposed to a kind of, I don't want to say so much codependency, because it's a little bit more one-way of needing that support, but how have you helped or help people navigate that piece? Like, how do you help break that down a little bit where it's not, I am the security blanket, but I'm a parent. Like, this is what parents do.
Yeah, and I think, well, first we have to look at like what's happening underneath the bids to solve a problem, right? When our kids are kind of, and I, like if your kid is in high school and you guys have developed this kind of, you can call it codependent, you can call it dependent, you can call it highly supported relationship where you are solving a lot of their problems for them, chances are that didn't start in high school. Chances are there have been glimmers of that kind of, you would trace that line back, and maybe it didn't look like, hey, I can't study for this test without you helping me with every single one of these note cards. Maybe it looked like, I need you to hold my hand down the slide every single time. Every single time I can't go down the slide without you holding my hand. And, as parents, we get kind of desensitized to the level of which we might be accommodating a child's bid to manage their anxiety. And so this is, I think, the distinction that's really important is like usually underneath a lot of the, behavioral management stuff that we get sucked into with our kids is probably some level of anxiety or confidence issues, or saying like, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can do this without your help. Or I don't think I can handle the feelings that come with being that vulnerable, right? Going to school and taking that test without having spent 3 hours quizzing me on every single thing, or reviewing every sentence of my paper, or whatever. Like, I'm sure there's lots of examples we can come up with, but like I think underneath that is anxiety, it's fear. And so as parents, we can inadvertently maintain that fear or maintain our child's dependence on our management of their fear, because we're basically saying to them, when we solve those problems for them, we're sort of indirectly communicating, I don't think you can handle it either. I got to do this for you. I got to sort of rescue you from this uncomfortable, impossible feeling that you cannot tolerate. And even though intellectually we don't think that about our kids, our behaviors in accommodating and rescuing and problem solving and fixing kind of communicate that lack of confidence in their ability to cope with the uncomfortable feeling that comes with maybe failing, or maybe not knowing the right answer, or being embarrassed, or being ashamed, or, you know, these are uncomfortable feelings and that we sometimes want to protect our kids from having, obviously, because we love them. But they're also important feelings for our kids to learn that they can have, because they're human feelings, and we are going to feel every one of those feelings in our lifetime, and we need to know that we can survive them. And so I think going back to what you were saying, which is like, remind me, Cal, because I got off on a tangent.
I think you totally touched on it. It's that aspect of, I trust that you don't need me to navigate this process,
Right.
but I'm here to help make it
Right.
not so bad, but you don't need it. And that really is that separation when it becomes impossible to do without you. And just one thing I wanted to say, it's come up a couple of times. I say this all the time. Parents can do everything right. As a coach, they could say everything that I say. You as a psychologist, they could say everything you're saying. It comes down to perception of the individual. And so your relationship as a parent is going to be different than other relationships. And so they're going to perceive information differently from different sources. And so we often see it. I mean, and I'll tap in Alyssa a little bit more on the perception piece, but we see this a lot where we encourage some struggle, and kids we work with are totally expecting of it from us, because it's a different type of trusting relationship where we're really hyper encouraging. We trust that you'll get through it, but sometimes with parents, it's built into, and again, it's often driven by the child wanting that feeling of safety, wanting mom to send the email to the teachers when I miss school. Like, why does mom need to send the email? Why does dad need to send the email? You can type, you can send it, right? Well, no, what if they get mad at me? What if the teacher gets mad at me? Well, they get mad at you just the same if I send it, if they're gonna get mad, right? Like, but just to tap in a little bit, Alyssa, we've been talking a lot about struggle and this resilience piece. And we talked about learning opportunities coming up from it. And so I'd love to just hear a little bit about your view through coaching, what you see often come up, where parents sometimes, like, I'd almost love to, like, from the child side, you get really in there with students where they share things with you. So what are some of the things that you've heard students specifically say, such as, I'm thinking of 2 students that I know you've worked with, but like, oh, I'll just wait till the last minute and my dad will do it for me. Where these types of relationships and this lack of trust can become this strategy that prevents this development or this struggle, because struggle's not fun. No one likes it. You're not going to sign up for struggle. But just sharing a little bit from almost the client end, where sometimes this builds in as a strategy to avoid struggle.
Well, I think, you know, when we're looking at resilience, right? In order to enable resilience, there needs to be a presumption of competence, right? And then also a confidence in one's own competence, right? Beyond, you know, just assuming that someone can do it. And I think, you know, if you have the opportunity to mitigate struggle, to, you know, remove the unnecessary suffering of, you know, trying to work it out, and it's a tried and true method that you can rely on, you're gonna take it, right? I mean, it's, you're independently making the choice to remove a source of stress from the equation. Naturally,
Sometimes it's rational, right? Hey, if I don't do it, my parents don't trust that I'll be able to do it on my own, so they might step in for me.
No,
right?
and well, we work on teaching, tools and strategies to help mitigate stress. But ultimately, you're kind of looking at what's going to give me the maximum reward and what am I going to experience the least amount of suffering? Well, passing that baton and kind of saying, it's all you, is a really easy option, right? And sometimes really cuts down on the opportunity to see, your own competence in action, right? I think if independence is a goal that we have, and then we go through and everyone, who's engaging with the individual who's, we're deeming independent in a way that suggests that they can't do it, it's the action doesn't match the message. And I mean, they get a really, really good reason as to, why they can rely on other members of the team, because all of those members have identified that we are here, we're not going to let anything bad happen, I'm going to catch you. So they're okay with that safety net, because I mean, everything up until now has suggested that it's going to be there, right? Last I checked, I had a parachute. So I know I can, let certain things go certain ways, and there's still a ripcord to pull. But the issue is there's not always the ripcord. Like at some point, the parachute just like circumstantially is not there, and then what? And how do we then prepare for that moment in order to really engage in that struggle and be able to push through anyway? And having the faith in their own self, right? We look at trust in terms of we want other people to trust us, right? I have clients that, I think about one constantly, it was like, trust the process, trust the process, trust the process. And I'm just like, you're not on the Sixers. Like, it's like, you're not the process. But, what his process was, but there's also that trust in yourself, right? It's like, I want other people to know that I can do it, but I also need to have enough evidence and enough tools and enough strategies that I also know that I can do it. It can't just be a baseless faith in something, right? It has to be grounded somewhere tangible.
I think that's such a great connection that I didn't even think about. It's like trust is fuel for confidence. And so confidence in self can be fueled by others being confident in us, which in a sense can be viewed as some level of trust. Trust in your abilities, trust in that sense. But so Sarah, just with some like tangibles, I love how you compared the examples of a 6-year-old and a 16-year-old. And you use that metaphor of a baton. There's different batons that you're going to pass over to trust in someone's ability. Like you might trust a kid to go running around in, let's say, in a like concrete driveway. They can run around the concrete driveway. If they fall, they get a little scratch. It's not the end of the world. Are you going to trust them to be running across the street when they're 5 or 6 years old? Maybe not yet. That's too big of a baton to pass over. But I'd love to just hear, like, when I was hearing some of this stuff, I mean, it's almost like this trust is the vehicle to build up resilience, almost in the sense of like exposure therapy. You slowly expose to more and more. So I'd love to just hear, like, I like to always shift in these kind of second parts of these webinars to some more of these like tangible takeaways. And so obviously everyone's going to be different. People have different developments, trajectories, that there's different circumstances. But how do parents or even professionals advising parents navigate which batons do I pass? What does this look like? Like, what if it messes up? Do I take the baton back? Like, what is this process?
Right. I mean, you have to know your kid, like, or the family you're working with. Like, you have to understand, like, because not all 16-year-olds have the same capacities. So it's not just like, oh, well, if they're 16, they've hit this benchmark, they can do it. Like, you have to take into account, like, you know, impulse control, planning capacity, executive functioning, all the stuff that you guys work on. Like, every kid is going to have a different set of capacities. And I think sometimes, like, I do a lot of work with parents who have kids who have anxiety, and a lot of anxiety looks a lot like this, right? Like avoidance of things, perfectionistic tendencies, you know, trouble executing stuff because basically it either needs to be perfect or I'm not going to do it. So they don't really do anything, you know. There's a lot of avoidance because they don't want to feel that uncomfortable feeling. And so I often tell parents to start with the feeling, like less about what you do or don't do and more about the fact that you can tolerate feeling uncomfortable, right? Like, and it ends up being more about like me as the parent. What am I, how am I going to change my accommodation? What am I going to say? I'm going to stop doing this for you. Because I know that you can do this and I'm here for you. And I'm also not going to keep doing this thing that I think is actually making it really hard for you to feel really confident that you can do this stuff. The nice thing about that is it's not requiring the kid to change their behavior. You're basically removing something that you're doing on their behalf that then requires the kid to feel the anxiety or the distress or the fear, and not in like a you're on your own, kid, figure it out, but in a very supported, like, this is real, this is happening, this is hard, and I know that you can handle this feeling, right? Like, that's a good place to start because it doesn't require the kid to change their behavior. It requires you to change yours, and you have a lot more control over what you do and don't do than making a kid do something or not do something. So like, I'm not going to make you study for this test. I'm going to stop staying up every night before your test and quizzing you on note cards, you know, like, because I know that you can do this. Now that's, again, like, you have to know your kid. If your kid does not have a capacity or a skill set for studying on their own, then pulling that out from them the night before a test, that's not reasonable, right? You need to sort of build up there. So maybe it's, I'm not gonna, maybe we're gonna go back to the beginning of this. Like, I'm not gonna help you write the note cards. You know, you start at the beginning and you scale up. Like you were talking about, Casey, exposure therapy. Like, with exposure therapy, you make a hierarchy of like the scariest possible thing or the biggest accommodation I'm making, all the way down to the lowest, like the smallest thing, like the thing that I'm like, I really don't need your help, but I'm still asking for it, and I can pretty comfortably manage it on my own. You start there, and then you slowly build up, you know, the degree to which you are pulling away some accommodations, or allowing the child to experience struggle, right? Or fear, you know, whatever it is that you're exposing them to, struggle, fear, you know, having to do something on their own, having to problem solve. So does that help answer like that question a little bit about like some tangible thing? Because I think when parents start trying to get their kid to change their behavior, you get into power struggles. You start fighting over, well, you know, I'm telling you, you have to study on your own now versus I'm not going to help you study. There's a big difference there.
And there's a great gray area there as well of, I will help you study if you ask for it. Or maybe I'll ask you if you want me to help you study. And so, Alyssa, like, I love when I see these parallels between mental health approaches to educational approaches, because it just reiterates that we're doing something right when you see parallels with the human brain. But Alyssa, I'd love for you just to elaborate for some of the non-professionals here. Like, what is scaffolded approaches? Like, maybe just like both the theoretical and a little bit of an example, because I think that's such a perfect analogy and exploration of this passing of the baton. It really is a scaffolding is the beginning, and then you trust the building's not going to fall. Like, that's where trust comes in, and resilience is the wind pushing against it. So if you, like, I know they're putting you on the spot here, but like, what is scaffolding in the educational sense, and how do you see that playing?
I think so. with respect to scaffolding. Exactly what, I think the best way to conceptualize that is like the visual of what it actually is, right? It's like the support that holds what's under construction together, right? So you're allowed to work on the thing that is not quite yet finished, right? In the example here, right? It's the child, right? The child is under construction. We're developing, right? And trying to figure out what are the most appropriate guardrails that still allow for movement and for wiggle room and growth. And I think the baseline that has to occur is before you think about how are you going to support, you need to evaluate your own participation, right? Like, what am I doing? What am I doing for? What am I doing with? What am I, allowing, ownership to place elsewhere? And so in first thinking that, you can kind of say, all right, which keys am I clutching really closely to my chest, and which ones have been, dangled in front like a shiny object, like you want to grab it for a minute, and kind of figure out like what are you as the support person most comfortable with giving up, but also at the same time, what do they need for you to give up? I think, in terms of, when we are first starting to take, ownership of tasks, as a partnership, right? And we coach, right? So we're partners in someone's process as they're developing. It's very natural to, identify certain areas where, it's always been done for, and trying to identify, okay, what is essential for you yourself to hold on to, but what can you model, explain, showcase, and have someone else do a dry run of, and then of course get your feedback, and kind of delineating like what needs very close observation in the beginning versus like what's a component of a task or a skill that we can kind of give them free rein to try out, and any result is still okay of learning. Like there's different types of reins we give to children as they develop, right? There's you figure out how to study for a test. If it doesn't go well, you don't do well on the test. We let you figure out how you want to go about preparing. But then there's also driving the car, right? You're not giving anyone free reins to figure out how to drive the car, right? It's a very like structured process in terms of what do you need to do? How do you need to make sure you do it safely? And well, yes, you have to give up the reins to do that. You are still very mindful of how your participation impacts someone else's ability to practice, right? And then ultimately the trust that you show them. I think about when I first learned how to drive, and my mother sat in the passenger seat and she flailed her arms and she held on to things. It didn't help. It didn't help, right? It incited panic.
The strategy where my mom sent me to the store and said, figure it out. I'm like, I don't even have a permit. She's like, you could just take the back roads. I was like,
no,
that was
like polar opposite parents.
She then would sit on her hands. She would then sit on her hands as to not incite the panic. But then if you looked at the corner of the eye, you could see her like pressing the brake that wasn't there, because she just couldn't not react. She was just like,
I do that to this day with my partner, where I'm like pressing down on the brake that is there.
And identifying like what is it that as you're building your scaffold, it's okay, I've handed over this key, but what does that actually look like? Am I giving you the full realm to do that task, or am I giving you kind of like indirect cues on how to do the task, even though I've relinquished some control? My mother never told me to slow down. Her foot out of the corner of my eye, though, did tell me you need to slow down.
And so I think it brings up a great point of the outcomes and the intensity of a potential outcome is important in this process to consider. Like, if someone's never been out alone before, and they're going to a high school party for the first time, are you going to give them the car keys to go and they have no curfew and like nothing? Like it's, and I think this is important for parents particularly, like this isn't black or white. And we talked about this again, like Sarah, a little bit. And so there's this, it's not an all or nothing approach with this, and parents have to be leaders a little bit. But let me segue into kind of the larger question. So just like leading into Sarah with like, how does building and using these trusting relations and trust as almost like a strategy, not just like this amorphous thing, but something that we actively try to implement. How does it impact family dynamics? And so one thing, we all have baggage, right? We all have our own stuff that we see in ourselves that we know maybe impacts us negatively. But like if there's a lack of trust in a small thing, oh my God, like I have to check in on the homework because what if you don't hand it in? What does that communicate versus building in trust with that process? And like, what does that influence on family dynamics? What are those ripple effects?
Well, I think it's taxing. It's taxing on parents to feel as though without my full attention and full active participation in all of my kids' things, they're going to flounder. And so then all of a sudden, we're working really hard. We're probably feeling a little resentful of how hard we're working. Our kids are feeling that resentment because that is a tangible, visceral, indirect thing that just fills the air. Like, you know, when somebody is like begrudgingly doing something to help you, like our intentions can, I think, and then this is, I think, it's like that metaphor. Have you guys heard of the fable or whatever, the story? Like, it's like a frog, and if you drop a frog in boiling water, he'll hop out. But if you put a frog in cold water and you slowly turn up the temperature, it'll just boil. And like, I think
love how vicious old fables were. I love
I know.
Please continue.
But it paints a very vivid picture. And I think as parents, we don't realize that like these things start very small. And before we realize it, we're like, oh gosh, we're in boiling water. We're stuck here. And like, one, you're not stuck. You can totally repair this pattern. I often call it like a dance. Like sometimes we're so deep in this dance, this family dynamic, this rhythm with our family roles, like who solves what problems and who goes to who to solve what problems. We get so deep in it that we don't even notice that we're doing it. And so that's where I feel like, you know, having some support, some like sort of objective eyes to come in and be like, hey, I don't know if you can even see this anymore because you're so in it. But I'm noticing certain patterns, like, you know, there seems to be a connection between you solving a problem for your kid and you not wanting to feel like discomfort in your body, right? Like when your kid has, when you get those like alert, I know like on Google Blackboard or whatever, now like you'll get like alerts from the school if your kid's missing an assignment. Like, what do you feel in your body when you get that alert? Like, how much is it like Alyssa's mom in the car being like, I gotta press the brake, I like stop, you know, like, do you have that visceral physiological response of panic? Because that's going to really inform how you then respond to your kid. And so if you can first like slow down enough to notice, like, what do I feel in my body when I get these cues from some environment, right? So whether it's my kid coming to me asking for certain accommodations, or the school is letting me know that my kid's not doing what I need them to be doing, and they're asking me to kind of not accommodate, but solve a problem or take some sort of action. How am I feeling in my body? Can I name that feeling? Can I actually identify like, oh, I'm feeling a little panicked. I'm feeling a little freaked out. I'm feeling a little angry. I'm feeling like I have to fix. And then I want to shut that feeling off because nobody likes that feeling. Our kids don't like it. We don't like it. We want to shut that feeling off. But can I sit in that for just a little bit longer before I impulsively or really sort of automatically go to that go-to response of like fixing the problem or yelling at my kid for not fixing the problem themselves? And how do I start to say, like, what's going on underneath? Like, something is happening underneath. Trying to understand with my kid, like, what's going on for you? How can I help you? That help may be emotionally supportive rather than solving the problem. It might be, do you want me to sit next to you while you write an email to your teacher and, you know, explain to them that, you know, what the plan is for getting the assignment in? Like, do you want me to just kind of like be here with you while you do that instead of doing it for you? They're like, that's that scaffolding piece of like doing sort of the smallest level of intervention and letting, so that they can sort of reach something that might be out of their reach if they were all by themselves, but they get to kind of cross that finish line on their own.
If anyone wants to look it up, it's Vygotsky Zone of Proximal Development. Support them with the level that they need and allow them to start doing more and more, and it expands. But I love how you brought that up. Like, it literally happened today. Our director, her child works with one of our coaches, and in the middle of a meeting, getting alerts about grades and looking at it. And you know, on the flip end, the child is sitting there being like, oh my God, grades are posted. My mom is looking at them right now. And all of this gets placed into it. I'm not saying we're going to change society, but we do have to just acknowledge, I got a 60 on a math test in 7th grade. I pulled out a B for the quarter. My mom never knew about the 60. I kicked into resilience, problem solving, directed self, and there was a trust there. Now, I'm not saying I'm like the model of every child out there. I know I'm not, but I'm just highlighting that example of, with the way society is set up, that doesn't happen. There isn't room for that to happen. And developing and trying to actively implement trust, we have to now. Whereas in the past, it was just kind of built in. Think about, for all of us, we used to go out to parties and do bad things, I'm sure, at some point in our lives, and didn't necessarily share that with our parents. And in certain circumstances, there was no harm, no foul. And we were able to build up resilience and learn through things. But with more access to information, we have to actively implement trust now, whereas before, trust was more inherent, and trust would only be broken when something bad happened. Now,
I think that goes back to this idea of like, depends on your definition of trust, because real trust in this context of safety and relationships is, you can have, you know, you can know every place your child goes to because they've got a phone that tracks everything that they do. And you can know what's going on and still allow them to make mistakes and make decisions. Yeah. And like you were saying, we have to kind of, we have to take a more active role in like taking that, sitting on our hands, if you will, like Alyssa described. Like, I literally have, I call it sitting on your hands as an exercise with parents, like more again with like, because I'm trying to instill a lot of this stuff from like very young ages. And I'll tell parents, sit on your hands while your child's playing for 10 minutes. Do not just observe, sit on your hands and like watch how amazing they are at solving their problems. But validate, be there. Don't be like a weird, like vacant, non-present person. You can validate, oh, you really want that top to come off that jar. Oh, that's hard, isn't it? I think you're gonna figure this out. I'm here. You know what I mean? Like, so you're narrating, you're there, you're naming, you're supporting emotionally, but you're not solving the problem. That's the same kind of, that's the same stuff that we're doing at 16 when our kids are going out to a party. We know what they're doing because we're watching it on their phones. And we're sort of saying like, I'm going to let you have this moment to figure things out. And you know, that's the kind of parenting that ultimately, if you're showing your kid consistently and reliably that you trust them, And again, not just like trust them to behave, but trust that they can experience tough stuff and that they will be okay, like that they can make mistakes and come to you, and you're not going to scream at them or tell them that they're idiots or like, you know, berate them, but to say, how do you want to fix this, or like what's going to be helpful to you? I'm here, I'm listening, right? Then those are the kids that are going to come to you when something really bad happens, and that's so important.
And
Yeah,
then-
no, and
Go.
the same pride that someone comes to you with, you know, when they do something good, right? It's like, hey, I got like 100 on this exam. You kind of want the same, maybe not pride, but the same kind of like gusto, like open to say like 25%, not sure what happened, but we're gonna work on it. Like, you know, you want that communication to be that open line, right? I think that's how, you know, I kind of feel like when we make it, right, in terms of like the relationship that I try to build, and, you know, each day is like, you can tell everyone's rushing to tell the good news, right? They always want to tell you, but it's when they first get that, when they get the glimmer of the struggle, and they still rush to tell you anyway, and not in a fix it for me type of way, just to like, this is what the lay of the land is, we have to figure something out. That I think is a really great display of the trust that you've built, right? I'm not expecting you to do anything about it. I'm not saying I need you to, I'm not asking you to cover it up for me and fix it. I'm just saying we have a problem, right? And I think that we language is really, really important once you've crossed that threshold.
And the point I was bringing up before, just to tie back, what I was really trying to connect is, it's hard. It's in your face. I was almost saying, like, my mom had it easier. It was kind of like, see no evil, hear no evil. It's not in front of me. Trust was more built in, is a forced strategy. Like, what were the other options? The other options were to actively become involved to remove the trust. Whereas now society is a little bit more leaning towards, you have to actively go out of your way, because like just with the example of my mom, the 70, she never needed to know about. And it worked out. And if I wanted to come to her, I could have. And like, whereas now it's in your face. And so parents, part of it also is, I just empathize so much. There is a lot of guilt. There's this perception of, well, if they're sharing these grades with me, and sometimes I'm getting calls from teachers of, I need to do more and all of this stuff, that it's hard to tap into
responsibility, right? It's a shared responsibility. We're both having the information. Am I supposed to do nothing, right?
Yeah.
You know, everyone wants to take up the charge and do whatever it is that they can to maximize the success for those that they care about, right?
So I just wanted to get to one last question. I know we're like down to the wire, but I think this is a good kind of recap. I've been saving it. So we're in high achieving societies, and so this was from an audience member, of where there seems to be so much competition between peers and adults. There's this competitive nature. And so how can we develop these trusting relationships in communities where the society seems to be prioritizing personal achievement over building these trusting relations and resilience? So just as like final notes on it, I feel like this is a good sum up of the tough position parents are in navigating this. So Sarah, if you don't mind, and then Alyssa, if you have any last things to throw in on this as well.
Yeah, and I think this is a real, like, legit phenomenon, right? Like, and it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, which is we live in a society now where, like, we're getting all these alerts, and we get all, like, there's a lot of pressure on parents to be a bit like snowplow parents, or like, you know, clearing the way for our kids. And a lot of parents do that, and it becomes so normalized that when you don't do that, people are kind of looking at you like, step up, where are you? And I think it takes a lot of self-confidence and confidence in your kid to sort of hold that boundary and within your family unit and be able to say, these are the values in our family. And they don't have to be the values in everyone else's family, and they're not going to be. And you're going to hear a lot about product rather than process, which we didn't talk about, but I think is an important thing, of like really focusing on the process of something rather than always the product, which happens so much in our world, of like from grades to salaries to likes and all the social media stuff. Like, we are very product focused. We don't spend a lot of time as a society talking about the process. How did it feel to do that? How did it feel to, you know, really want that and fight for it? How did it, like, you know, how did it feel to fail at that? How did it, like, to be able to say like that the feeling is just as important as the end result. And so, like, just know, like, if that's important to you, to be able to have a child who's really resilient and self-actualized rather than high achieving. And by the way, achievement follows self-actualization, but if you prioritize achievement in and of itself, you kind of can hit a wall. But like, if you want your kid to be achieving, that's fantastic. Focus on self-actualization, and there's a really high chance that they will achieve. Don't skip that part. Don't skip right to the achievement part. That doesn't usually result in a lot of high achievement. And so knowing that like you're kind of maybe shirking the norm, but that you're doing it the way that actually builds the real result and the real satisfaction in life and healthy relationships with oneself and their family and other people in their life. Like, this is more important than a grade or an outcome or a win. And so like sometimes you have to kind of swim against the current a little bit. And you have to just trust that because everybody is doing it and even schools are promoting it, that that's the right choice for your family.
I love that achievement versus actualization bit. I don't know if anyone's seen the movie WALL-E, but I was thinking about all the people that stopped using their legs. They were just moving in the seats.
Yeah, the blobs, the
yeah, they're getting from A to B, but guess what? They didn't do any of the stuff to actually actualize it, so now they don't have legs that work anymore. It's you need the muscles to really get there. But any last thoughts on that, Alyssa? Anything you wanted to throw in? No pressure, but I always like to get a last time.
The openness of one's own process, right, I think is really important, right? And like creating space for like the fallibility of it. I mean, especially when the focus seems to be very much like achievement and output driven, right? It's everyone is graduating, everyone is doing X, everyone, you know, has this on Instagram. Like it's whatever that thing looks like, but also, you know, making sure that there's still time to kind of look at, we're not just nitpicking their process and encouraging growth there, but also the openness in terms of your process, right? Like, how do you go about doing things? Where are the areas that, you know, you've made blunders, or, you know, where you've had to learn something? You know, I think it's really important to open that line of, we mess things up here sometimes because people do that, right? Everyone, you know, everyone I work with, they know that I made very terrible cookies for Thanksgiving, and they know that I thought I would learn how to read music when I was in the 4th grade, but never actually did. And I just was in the band for 3 years thinking I'd fake it till I make it. Like, they know these things, right? And they know a bunch of others as well. And we insert them into the conversation and insert them into the relationship. So that way, like, there's space for the things that we do struggle with, and we can talk about them. So that way we can find ways to mitigate that struggle, to move the goalpost, you know, move ourselves towards what it is that we're trying to achieve, to get to that end point, with respect to like the time, the focused effort it takes in order to get there. Like, I think the biggest misconception that in a lot of, individuals, they come our way, it's just like, everyone's doing it, but I'm not doing it. No one is doing it. It just looks like they're doing it. And are they really doing, like, where are we getting this information? It's like perception versus reality, right? Of how have we defined success? What does it actually look like to achieve that thing? And what is it that you're doing with what is it you even want to do and how you're going to personally define success? I think
it's one of the hardest things as a parent, but also one of the proudest things that you can do as a parent is doing what's best for your kid and being confident that that's the goal, is doing what's best for your kid, not necessarily what others are doing. And maybe it'll influence others to start following your lead and help more kids. But it really is, I was thinking of a funny story. It's just somewhat related, but to kind of end on this last note, my brother, all he wanted for lunch when he was in elementary school was cold hot dogs. Cold hot dogs in like the 2nd grade. And my mom would always send it, to a certain point where she got a call from the school concerned about giving lunch assistance and all of this pressure about, are you doing the right thing? Everyone comes with sandwiches. Like, why aren't you sending sandwiches? Do you need lunch assistance? And my mom had to confidently sit there and say, but this is what my kid wants, not needs so much, but this is like, I want him to advocate for himself. I want him to feel comfortable with expressing himself. And so for parents, just like any humans, you're going to have some immediate pressures, and we model behaviors for our kids. Don't focus on the immediate pressures, focus on those longer term goals. I know that everyone else is getting tutors right after their bad 1st grade. Do you feel like you need one? Don't feel the pressure. Like, I trust that you can navigate this process. I think you can. Do you want to try that first? These types of things, and this is really like the end all, is it can make such a healthy dynamic in the family. And part of the reason why I'm so happy to have Dr. Sarah Brad and then Alyssa joining is this is such a confluence of where our work intersects. Is this type of topic is long-term growth and development in education, but also long-term growth and development in mental health and family dynamics. And that's why I love doing topics like this. So on that note, thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, Alyssa. It's a good one when we go over. So I appreciate the extra minutes from everyone. And I look forward to doing it again sometime.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Always fun.
All right. Hope everyone has a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.